Hello, this is Louis transitioning from the hostage diaries into a new segment. We've got transition from my Morpork mentality, which was comedy in a sense, dealing with a lot of issues. Me transitioning from my head of state theories as a mainframe into the madness of Van Gogh, hopefully, to capture history in a real world scenario. So I'm just going to start off with what's been going on in the new age since I last made over 100 videos. This is it's been a while since I've done this, so I'm out of practice. I'm not my vivacious self. Uh, it's been we're encountering a new wave of an idle army, as you would. There has been, with the advancements in technology, which were apparent when I used YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and things like that, which I still continue to document my life and theories and things like that. I still hope to one day be famous for my. I honestly doubt it'll be within my lifetime or I think after I might be researched as someone who had some interesting theories. I covered a lot of terrain. Not only did I cover the wackiness of the Morpork mentality, the Robin Williams sort of comedian, dealing with the theories of being a head of state and the main being used as a mainframe in many scenarios. I started into economics and politics. So we're going to start off with this idle army, which is created by pure popularity and as free markets. The idle army is now it's pure free market supply and demand, and it goes from everyday people taking the tools that are at their disposal, the internet and the phones and the video and things like that, and finding ways. It goes back to this reality craze, and I think there are way too many reality shows on TV, but it's basically just a popularity contest. And it's almost like being at the high school talent show. Whoever has any shred of talent and is appealing to a mass audience then gets a contract and then it's sort of an entree into the world of fame, which fame is, everybody knows fame is everything in this modern age and scenario. So the free market idols go about their scenario with using their skills or whatever and most of the time, I just read a quote the other day, you would rather worship an idol than a genius. Or it really makes a lot of sense. It's popularity at its worst in some aspects because it mutates the scenario of what's going on in the world, and it's really a bizarre scenario what these idols are doing, and it's starting to spread. It's a technological dawning age globally with the connectivity. You've got some nations that are trying to hold on to their power, and so they're fighting back against this. And the United States is sending in their idle army to preach freedom, when in actuality there's also underlying economic wars going on. So there's a subversive way of conquering the globe by the United States using economics, these corporate war machines, and capitalism has devolved from just a necessary entity. Capitalism was necessary to get us from a
age when we were in the dark ages to this modern age of smartphones and things like that. And I think the technological dawning age of connectivity is a key to a time when capitalism needs to be readdressed. Not to mention economies of scale. It's you preach a free market and competition, but it's almost as if it's anti-competitive because there's so much money created out there by some companies that they're able to buy up any of the good ideas. They're going through the world, these companies with these huge cash reserves from massive success, and I'm not against the success. I'm glad. I mean, it's good. Capitalism is good. I'm still a capitalist, but I just think things need to be readdressed or the rest of the world is going to lag way behind. So any good ideas out there, these vast pools of wealth, go and purchase them. So you've got these companies going out and buying up every good idea. So rather than creating, and it's almost as like Silicon Valley's turned into the Death Star. Yeah, so rather than these other countries or these other cities or these other states creating corporations that will employ people, you've got these groups of wealth from around the world that are just buying up the best ideas, and they're smart enough to know what good ideas are. So when they see a good idea, they go in, they buy it up, and then they turn it into so rather than a $10 million, turn off the phone there, rather than $10 or $100 million for an idea, that could become $1 billion corporation that employs hundreds of thousands in an area that desperately needs jobs. And I've seen this happen time and time again. In the show Silicon Valley, which is really brilliant by Mike Judge and Alec Berg, shows how difficult it is to take an idea. He has the option of selling his idea outright for $10 million to one tech behemoth, or he can sell 10% for $200,000 and try to launch the company and turn it into $1 billion entity, and without any resource. And he's fighting against the resources of this huge tech company. And then it goes on. It's just the whole series is about how difficult it is to make it in the tech world. And he should have taken the $10 million probably. But eventually it goes into the point where they get into tech ethics. They call it tethics. And that's one of the things. Predatory capitalism is mentioned in the show. And that's one of the things I think we've devolved into predatory rather than a capitalism that is fair and good. Then we've devolved into this predatory capitalism of eating this buffet of ideas and eating everything around the world. So the United States is preaching free market capitalism, while it controls 25% of the wealth in the world. And I'm looking directly at Latin America. There's a chart showing gross domestic products, GDP of all these nations. And the United States is 1/4 of the world's GDP. And then the rest of Latin America doesn't even add up to near that much. So it's as if the United States is siphoning off America, the rest of America, and producing vast wealth because they built a machine, this Leviathan, like Thomas Hobbes talked about, this economic and political Leviathan of freedom, which is actually a predatory war machine that's trying to take over the world, or it's fighting against China, and it uses China as justification for growth. So you've got three superpowers in the world: the EU, which is fading, China, which is growing, and the United States, which is growing, even though it has a lot of problems. I think if the United States pulled back, that China would pull back. China has shown a propensity to be smart in it, and I think if the world evolved, I've been calling for this awakening, enlightenment globally for a long time now, and I think we really need this. I think it's going to lead to a global governance, which the superpowers do not want, in my estimation. The United States does not want a strong, centralized global government because it would lose a lot of its power as the wealthy policeman of the world. Yeah, it is an oxymoron. You always talk about how cops are supposed to be poor, but in the United States, we're the super wealthy and the cops. And just it leads to a lot of bad precedents and decisions and theoretical ideology. So you've got this necessary evolution, in my estimation, to solve the problems, because the rest of the countries of the world can't compete with the behemoth, the United States, which is using branding as a way to, because you can't get away with war anymore. War is deemed evil unless you're fighting totalitarianism or authoritativism. Then you can attack, like when we attacked Iraq and got rid of a dictator. That's all right, that's justified. But if you're just invading a country like it has been throughout history, if you look throughout history, war was everywhere. It covered it was constant, and it shaped the world. But now war is deemed bad or evil, and so the United States has found a loophole to that: economic war. So it mass produces tons of wealth, and then these corporations grow so big and move into these other parts of the world and then plant their flags but what they're really doing is weakening the government, because they're the economies of scale. When you got a Walmart that goes into a Latin American city, it wipes out a whole subculture of mom and pop shops, the smaller sole proprietorship or partnerships or even LLCs, and it devastates a region, and then it's just a funnel of money through that. It's like butchering an animal and then taking the meat and leaving the carcass there. So these countries are left with an inability to cooperate. And I came up with the idea a long time ago, or not, yeah, I guess it's been a while now. For Louisiana is facing difficulty because the oil and gas industry is on the way out because of the electric cars coming in 20 to 30 years, and Louisiana is heavily reliant on oil and gas. There's still going to be natural gas, but it won't be like everybody filling up their car, so it's going to be a huge hit to the tax base and these high-paying jobs, and you'll see a lot of these huge refineries that are going to close up shop because there's no more oil to refine into gas. So I came up with the idea of a Louisiana Latin America Economic Evolutionary Conference in New Orleans to bring in all these representatives from Latin America and Caribbean, and have them meet with this council of educated folks, kind of like the World Economic Forum or the Aspen Ideas Fest, where it's a year-round body that would look at the problems and the opportunities in Latin America, and then help them improve their countries. And one of the big things they would do is improve their higher education system. You'd probably have to improve your universities, your research and development, bring in think tanks and incubators to try to create some new businesses, which would be bought out by Silicon Valley Death Star that would come in. If you ever do come up with a good idea that could turn into the next Google or Facebook, it would get bought out before, and it would make some money for some people, but it would not bring in the wealth or the economic stability that these nations need. And the company would be moved to Silicon Valley or wherever, and used to make billions for these already billionaires, make more billions. So my idea was then it would build trade bridges between Louisiana and help increase its, improve its economic development and create some new trade, and therefore help the state when it was probably heading into recession. But I haven't gotten anywhere on that so far. But one of the keys to this is Latin America seems to be a target for USA corporations looking to expand. There's always this phenomenon of growth, and growth is a good thing up to a point. But eventually, and we're starting to face this climate change, pollution mentality. Growth is bad for climate change. The bigger the carbon footprint, the worse it's going to be. So these companies are growing, are moving into these other areas because they have to continue to grow, or their stock price, it's all about their stock prices, has to go up. So these companies are moving into these areas, and they have much greater, I mean, the advantages they have are, it's not a fair fight at all. And so it's competition, but it's really not fair at all to these countries and these small businesses down that are getting wiped out. So they've got to come up with a solution, and my idea was to try to put incubators to where it allowed companies in these smaller regions, smaller countries to grow before you would allow competition in. And if you illuminate the problem, it would probably solve a lot of the problems. So rather than sending in these corporation war machines as they were, because you can't go to war anymore and attack with your military, you use your economic military or your media. And the whole the United States culture is a way of brainwashing other parts of the world away from what's actually going on. So the media is actually destabilizing the world. It's this melting pot mentality that it's bringing to the rest of the world, and it's preaching freedom, but in actuality, it's very belligerent in its action because it's destabilizing centuries of history and history bedrock. So therefore, it makes it easier for the people with all the cash, the KingGodDollar scenario, this wealthy army of idols to go and buy up all the property around the world. So it's really the United States seems to me to be trying to take over the world by buying it. They want to just keep mass producing when they've already got 25%. If the United States is going to keep growing, they keep preaching growing. What do they want? 50% of the global GDP and that way they could buy the rest of the world and then and for the freedom, or it's just an asinine probability of what's going on. So where does it go from here? Economics needs to mutate. There needs to be a new form of capitalism that allows for these other countries to grow up. Without having the competition. There needs to be bridges of competition to, and maybe the problem is these corporations going global because they have to grow bigger, and that way it's funneling money into the United States, and therefore it keeps vastly expanding the GDP. I'll admit it, the United States has a vastly superior university system, and it seems to want everybody to get a college degree except for the immigrants who do the dirty work, whereas the United States does not need so many college degrees, but it seems as a way it's like it wants to increase the per capita value in order to increase the GDP overall. So each person grows bigger and bigger and fatter with their get up until the point where they get their McMansions and and their and their stock portfolio and their individual retirement houses. I mean, individual retirement accounts, and their houses keep growing in value because they keep flipping houses and they keep growing up, and the real estate market keeps growing and growing and growing. But where does it all end? Does the rest of the world plan on doing the same sort of thing? Because if the rest of the world followed the American lead, let's say 1.4 billion Chinese or 1.2 billion Indians decided, well, we're going to become American consumerists, the devastation to the planet would be astronomical because of pollution and climate change. So we're at the point where we're starting to address climate change, and capitalism seems to be one of the biggest proponents of pollution in the world. So it's time for this new capitalism to come up. And I know the United States is going to fight against it. The media won't even talk about it because they're intent on spreading their brand of freedom to conquer the world as much as possible, But pollution has a lot bigger problems when you start adding in carbon footprint from consumerism, and everything seems to be growing rapidly. And it's going to, I mean, the problem, would you rather have the problem of global warming solve it 50 years ago, or would you rather start today like we're having, and it's so difficult to solve? There are other problems out there that will, in 50 years, be a lot worse. Overpopulation's one of them. We need to address it. This notion of growth and it's backwards, to be honest with you, and dangerous. And the only reason it's out there is because you're creating more wealth. This notion of growth creates more wealth for more people, and more individuals keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, whereas it's not necessary. And so things like that need to be addressed, in my opinion. And I think this would come from this global awakening, global enlightenment. Hopefully the Economic Evolutionary Conference could address Latin America could have used some of the influence of the United States, but in the good way. The United States has a lot of problems. Consumerism and blatant is one of the big problems in the United States. So there needs to be ways to solve the problem, but definitely improve the university systems. Well, universities create a lot of research and development, and a lot of things are invented, especially places like Stanford and Silicon Valley, and now Cornell Tech and the Silicon Alley in New York City. They're just creating tons of massive wealth out there, and they're going around the world and shopping for the best ideas so they can turn it into the next billion-dollar product, rather than allowing other countries to grow industries that might compete with them in the future. So it really is asinine to say what's going on. And so what next needs to happen is, I think the status quo will perpetuate. I think there's got to be real leadership. The United Nations is a great organization, but it doesn't seem to have any muscle behind it or leadership. It's just, there needs to be an organization with some real groups, some economic development teams globally that can go to these nations and help them grow up economically, evolve economically out of the problems. Otherwise, it really is. You've got corporations going in, butchering these, it's like butchering a cow, cutting off the tenderloin and leaving the rotting corpse to die and rot, and it smells really bad. And there's disease and things like that. So economically, you're looking at just rancid meat laying all over the world,
whereas the United States is prospering because of, in its preaching, is free market capitalism, which is outdated in my estimation. I agree, capitalism was one of the greatest things that ever happened. It got us smartphones, it got us internet, it got us computers, it got us electric cars, but there has to be some balance put into the estimate, in my estimation, or it's just going to turn into a nightmare scenario, which could lead to global revolution. But the problem is, the media, even though they preach freedom, would not allow for a revolution against the United States, the economic war it's waging, because it's too heavily invested in this revolution that they're trying to conquer the world. They're sold on trying to undermine tradition globally by it's paying for history, which is a nightmare scenario because history is very ugly. If you look at it, I mean, if you start having to pay for it, if you start bringing countries to trial for their history and then making them pay for it, who's the beneficiary? Those with no history seem to be the beneficiary. And you're what are you going to do? Transfer all the control of wealth, or are you going to create more wealth? It's one of the problems of what to do. I mean, it's a huge problem, but it has to be addressed. Something needs to be done. And it's just, there's some real problems out there in the world. And my estimation, economic evolution would help address it would be an example that could be used by other parts of the world. Asia seems to be doing fine. Africa's lagging behind, but it could be improved. It's just Europe, I think, is on the way. It's failing. It's going to fall apart. It's turning into a melting pot, which will probably destabilize a lot of it. Eventually, I think you could see conflict breaking out in Europe, possibly again. But it's asinine. My propensity towards Latin America deals with the connection of the Catholic Church, which seems to be doing nothing. Leadership. It helps the poor, but it doesn't help the middle and the upper classes. And so the middle and the upper classes worship the countries that they live within, because there's no real leadership within the church. But it's good for the poor, and it's good for they have churches, they have schools, they have things like that. But the people that these schools create, they tend to worship the countries, the KingGodDollar. So you've got, and then the Catholics of America look to these politicians who have sold their soul to the system, but they don't really, and there's no real leadership in it. That's one of the reasons that I started with Latin America. And Latin America is just kind of a stagnant economic system. It's not really growing. It's the only country with any prowess down there is Brazil, and that's probably because it's a member of the BRICS and it's so large. But there needs to be something done, and it's just amazing to me that there's no awakening happening, this enlightenment that we're on the cusp of. And the United States doesn't want it because they're winning. They're winning they keep mass producing more and more wealth. And so I guess it's also because we've been on one of the biggest bull markets in the history of the world. So if it wasn't for the bull market out there, and we're facing a debt crisis, which is astronomical. Globally, there's $240 trillion in debt. I mean, it's just astronomical. It shows that democracy is not foolproof system. It has and there needs to be some checks and balances in there, and that's another one of my theories. You need to bring in either some sort of other sort of leaders that have more control over the system, that can control what's going on. So, USA World War, waging economic war, the media artillery preaching freedom but really propagating the revolution, and the idle armies that are attacking, created by the technological advancement. And I'm stuck here in Savannah wasting away with no help. Savannah is a wonderful place, I guess. I'm not a part of it, seemingly. Georgia won a national championship and the World Series, so they ought to be happy. But they had to wait, so they'll probably make me wait longer before I get any invitations to anything. Lack of success and tangibility. So my estimation is what's going to happen to me for my theories, because obviously I'm an insightful thinker. Will I be remembered or will I be buried?